Dini is arguing with him.
Check him out. What do you want to do?
This game's over. I'm the chief second.
All right.
I stopped the fight.
All right.
He would not give in, Angelo Dundee. He cared about his fighter too much.
That's it. They stopped the fight at TKO.
Larry, I'd like you to explain why you've been crying.
You know, so I really respect Ali a whole lot.
It hurt you to punish him that way, didn't it?
I feel that he fought one of the baddest heavyweights in the world today, and you cannot take credit from him.
Before the world ever knew his name, Larry Holmes was just a skinny kid from a crowded little house in Easton, Pennsylvania. He was the fourth out of 12 children, 12 mouths to feed, 12 hearts to care for, all crammed into a life that never once promised comfort. In 1954, the Holmes family packed up what little they had and left Cuthbert, Georgia, for Easton. The streets weren't paved with gold. There was no warm welcome, just cold winters, tight corners, and a long fight to survive. Larry's father, John, found work in Connecticut as a gardener and could only afford a visit every few weeks. Some folks might have called that abandonment, but not Flossie, Larry's mother. She saw it differently. He didn't forsake us, she said. He just didn't have anything to give. That line hits like a punch to the ribs. It wasn't bitterness. It was understanding, the kind that comes from years of waiting, praying, and making do. Welfare kept food on the table, barely. But for a boy like Larry, it wasn't enough. He wasn't just growing up. He was growing hungry. Hungry to help. Hungry to change something. So in the 7th grade, when most kids were still learning fractions, Larry Holmes made a decision. He dropped out of school and went looking for work. Not because he didn't care about learning, but because the family needed shoes, needed food, needed warmth. His first job? A car wash. $1 an hour. Long hours, wet clothes, and no promises. But he stuck with it. Later, he got behind the wheel of a dump truck, and then found himself hauling rock in a quarry. Dusty, dangerous, back-breaking work. This wasn't some polished path to glory. This was survival. This was a boy taking the weight of a broken world and choosing not to be broken by it. Every load of rock he moved, every dollar he scraped together, Larry was building something. Strength, toughness, patience, the kind of stuff that doesn't show up on a resume but wins battles later in life. He didn't come from riches. He didn't have a fancy gym, a big-name trainer, or even the full support of his father. But what he did have was fire, the kind that keeps burning long after others fade out. Before he ever laced up gloves or climbed into a ring, Larry Holmes had already fought 1,000 unseen battles. And more than that, he won them. Larry Holmes didn't grow up dreaming of gold medals or standing on podiums. He was too busy scrubbing cars for $1 an hour and hauling rocks out of quarries. But something changed when he turned 18. He slipped on a pair of boxing gloves, not because someone told him he'd be great, but because he needed a way out. He needed a fight, not for glory, for something deeper, for life. By the time he stepped into the ring for his 21st amateur fight, the whispers were getting louder. That Holmes kid, he's got something. But on that night in 1972, down in the thick Texas heat of Fort Worth, Larry wasn't just fighting any old boxer. He was standing across from Nick Wells, a savage southpaw with a knockout habit. And we're not talking long wars. Wells ended most of his fights before the crowd even finished their popcorn. First round, boom, done. Larry didn't make it out of the first round either. Wells clipped him clean, and that was that. But the story didn't end there. The Olympic Committee, those folks who watched with sharp eyes and quiet judgment, still saw something in Holmes, something worth taking another look at. So they sent him to the Olympic box office in West Point, New York. One last shot to prove he belonged. This time, he faced Dwayne Bobbick. Big, strong, polished. The kind of fighter who made trainers nod and opponents flinch. The bell rang, and early in the first round, crack, Bobbick caught Larry with a right hand that nearly folded him. Larry hit the canvas. The crowd held its breath, but somehow he got up, wobbly, sure, but his eyes still burned with that same fire. Larry moved, danced, popped jabs into Bobbick's face like he was punching through his own doubts. But Bobbick was relentless. In the second round, he charged like a bull. Holmes tied him up to survive. Once, twice. The ref didn't like it. By the third round, it was clear Holmes was trying to keep from being steamrolled. He was moving, jabbing, holding, doing everything he could to stay in the fight. But the ref had seen enough. He waved it off, disqualified for holding too much. Some saw it as a loss. But if you looked closer, really looked, you saw something else. A young man who took on two of the most dangerous amateur fighters in the country. A man who got knocked down and still stood up swinging. A man who refused to be broken, even when the world told him to stay down. That night, Larry Holmes walked out of the ring without a medal, without a trophy, and without cheers. But he walked out with something far more important: experience. And quietly, deep down, he knew his time was coming. By 1973, Larry Holmes had already lived a dozen lifetimes. He knew the sound of gravel under a dump truck. He knew what it felt like to watch his mother stretch every dollar to feed 12 hungry kids. But what he didn't know, at least not fully yet, was how far these fists could take him. He stepped into the pro ring for the first time on March 21st, 1973. The crowd wasn't huge. There were no blinding lights or screaming fans. But for Larry, it felt like the whole world was watching. Across from him stood Roddle Dupree. 4 rounds later, Holmes walked away with his hand raised. First pro win. Clean decision. No drama. Just business. But Larry wasn't in this game to coast. If he was going to climb the mountain, he needed to learn from the best. And he did, but not in the way you might think. Holmes became a sparring partner, a live target, for some of the most dangerous men in boxing. Muhammad Ali, Joe Frazier, Ernie Shavers, and Jimmy Young. Titans. Warriors. Icons. They paid him well to take punches. But Holmes wasn't just there to survive. He was studying, soaking it all in, timing, rhythm, the way Ali moved, the way Frazier pressed, the way Shavers' punches felt like thunder clapping against your bones. I was young, Holmes said later. I didn't know much, but I was holding my own sparring those guys. And I thought, hey, these are the champs. If I can hang with them now, what happens later? He kept grinding, kept fighting, kept building. Then came March 1978. His name was rising, but people still doubted him. That changed when he stepped into the ring with Ernie Shavers, one of the scariest punchers in boxing history. Shavers didn't just beat opponents, he erased them. His punches didn't land, they exploded. Most thought Holmes was walking into a storm. But when the bell rang, something incredible happened. Round after round, Holmes boxed like a man who'd been waiting his whole life for this. He didn't run. He didn't panic. He danced, jabbed, moved. He made Shavers miss and made him pay. 12 rounds later, the scorecards told the truth. Holmes won every round on 2 cards and all but one on the third. That night, people stopped looking at him as a sparring partner. They stopped asking, is this guy for real? Because now they knew. That victory cracked the door open. And waiting on the other side was Ken Norton, the WBC heavyweight champion, a man carved out of stone, a fighter known for breaking jaws. Literally. The date was set, June 9th, 1978, Las Vegas. Holmes wasn't just getting a title shot. He was stepping into destiny. The world didn't know it yet, but Larry Holmes was about to shake the entire sport. The night was June 9th, 1978. Las Vegas shimmered in the desert heat, but inside the ring, it was war. Larry Holmes stood face-to-face with Ken Norton, the WBC heavyweight champion. Norton wasn't just a title holder. He was a powerhouse, the man who had broken Muhammad Ali's jaw, the man known for grinding opponents into dust. But Holmes wasn't there to play it safe. He was there to take what he believed was already his. For 14 rounds, it was pure chaos. Back and forth, punch for punch, neither man willing to bend. When the bell rang to close the 14th, the scorecards all said the same thing. Even. Deadlocked. 7 rounds to 7. It all came down to the 15th. And in that final stretch, tired, hurting, and with the whole world watching, Holmes found something deep inside. He dug in, fired jab after jab, pushed through the fire. And when it was over, 2 judges leaned his way. Split decision. New WBC heavyweight champion, Larry Holmes. And just like that, the kid who once washed cars for $1 an hour became a man with a crown. But being champion doesn't mean anything unless you defend it. So Holmes got to work. First came Alfredo Evangelista. Knockout. Then Ossie Ocasio. Another knockout. Business as usual. But then came Mike Weaver. Nobody thought much of Weaver. His record didn't shine. 19 wins, 8 losses. People said he didn't belong in the same ring with Holmes. But the moment the bell rang, Holmes found himself in a war. 10 rough rounds. Then, late in the 11th, Holmes landed a clean uppercut that dropped Weaver. In the 12th, Holmes came in like a storm, throwing thunder until the referee had no choice but to stop it. After the fight, Holmes didn't boast. Instead, he looked at Weaver and said, "This man knocked the devil out of me. You'll give him credit now." 3 months later, fate spun the wheel again. Ernie Shavers. Yeah, that Ernie Shavers got a shot at the title after knocking out Ken Norton in just 1 round. And now, Holmes had to face him again. Holmes controlled the early rounds. Then came the 7th. Shavers uncorked a right hand from the heavens, and it landed flush. Holmes hit the canvas hard, but he got up, dazed, shaken but still standing. He made it through the round, and then he took over, punished Shavers until the referee stepped in during the 11th. Holmes had survived the fire and walked out stronger. The title wasn't just his. It was safe. Next came Lorenzo Zanin. Knockout. Then Leroy Jones. Knockout. Scott Ledoux. Same story. But nothing could compare to what came next. October 2nd, 1980. Caesar's Palace. Las Vegas. Muhammad Ali was coming out of retirement, chasing history. He wanted to become the first man to win the heavyweight title 4 times. But what he didn't know was that Larry Holmes wasn't just another opponent. He was the student who had once sparred with him. And now, he was the teacher. From the opening bell, Holmes didn't hold back. He jabbed, he moved, and he punished. Ali, older, slower, and not himself, couldn't keep up. Round after round, Holmes landed clean shots. It wasn't just a fight. It was a one-sided lesson. By the end of the 10th, Ali's corner had seen enough. His trainer stepped in. The fight was over. Holmes had just handed Muhammad Ali the only stoppage loss of his legendary career. But it didn't feel like a victory. Not fully. In the post-fight interview, tears welled up in Holmes's eyes. When asked why, he said quietly, "I respected Ali a whole lot. He fought one of the baddest heavyweights in the world today, and you can't take credit from him." His trainer, Richie Giachetti, couldn't bear to watch. Awful, he called it. The worst sports event I ever had to cover. Even Sylvester Stallone, sitting ringside, said it felt like watching an autopsy on a man still alive. Ali later said his performance was drained by thyroid medication, but the damage was done. Some say that fight started the road to his Parkinson's. For Holmes, it was never about destroying legends. It was about proving he was one. And now, the world had no choice but to see it. Larry Holmes wasn't just the champ. He was the man. Larry Holmes was on a roll, knocking out opponent after opponent like clockwork. 8 straight bodies hit the canvas. But on April 11th, 1981, the streak hit a wall. He met Trevor Berbick, tough, hungry, and ready for a fight. Holmes couldn't finish him early. This one went the distance. All 12 rounds. It was a win, sure, but Holmes walked away knowing the fire wasn't always going to burn through everyone. 2 months later, he lit up again. Leon Spinks, the man who once shocked Muhammad Ali, stood across the ring. The crowd expected a war. What they got was a demolition. 3 rounds. That's all Holmes needed to flatten a former undisputed champ. Boom. Done. But then came Ronaldo Snipes, a name most had barely heard. November 6th, 1981. Everything seemed fine until the 7th round. Snipes caught Holmes with a thunderous shot. Larry staggered, bounced off the turnbuckle like a pinball, and went down. It was chaos. But Holmes didn't panic. He stood back up, eyes sharp, heart beating loud in his chest. Round after round, he clawed his way back in. In the 11th, Holmes closed the show, stopped Snipes cold. And then came a night soaked in tension. June 11th, 1982. Caesar's Palace parking lot turned into a battlefield. A custom-built arena. 32,000 people watching in person. Millions more around the world. Holmes was facing Jerry Cooney, undefeated, Irish-American, and hyped like the second coming. Promoter Don King had stirred the pot. The Great White Hope, they called him. Headlines, TV shows, magazine covers, all about Cooney. Holmes, the champion, got introduced before the challenger. Even boxing tradition was tossed aside. Holmes didn't like the circus. He didn't like the noise. But he liked the fight. Second round. Holmes dropped Cooney with a clean right. The crowd exploded. But Cooney got up swinging. His left hook was nasty. One shot rattled Holmes so hard he later said, "I felt it in my bones." But the champ didn't fold. He bit down and kept coming. Cooney started to fade by the 9th. Too many low blows cost him points. By the 10th, they stood toe-to-toe, trading bombs. And when the bell rang, both men nodded. Respect. In round 13, Holmes let loose. Punch after punch, clean, sharp, ruthless. Cooney crumbled. He stood back up, but his trainer had seen enough. He stepped into the ring and stopped it. Holmes raised his hands, not with arrogance, but with pride. The fight was over, but something beautiful followed. Holmes and Cooney, two men pushed into a storm of hype and hate, became lifelong friends. Next up, two walkovers. Randall Tex Cobb and Lucian Rodriguez couldn't touch Holmes. Easy wins. But then came a real test. May 20th, 1983. Tim Witherspoon, just 15 fights under his belt. A 6-1 underdog. No one gave him a chance. But inside the ring, it was a different story. Witherspoon jabbed, moved, and made Holmes work like never before. 12 tough rounds. Close. Very close. When the decision was announced, Holmes held onto the belt by a thin, controversial split. That night, Witherspoon proved he belonged. Holmes proved he could survive anything. Then came Scott Frank, knocked down in 5. Then the drama hit. In round 13, Holmes let loose. Punch after punch, clean, sharp, ruthless. Cooney crumbled. He stood back up, but his trainer had seen enough. He stepped into the ring and stopped it. Holmes raised his hands, not with arrogance, but with pride. The fight was over, but something beautiful followed. Holmes and Cooney, two men pushed into a storm of hype and hate, became lifelong friends. Next up, two walkovers. Randall Tex Cobb and Lucian Rodriguez couldn't touch Holmes. Easy wins. But then came a real test. May 20th, 1983. Tim Witherspoon, just 15 fights under his belt. A 6-1 underdog. No one gave him a chance. But inside the ring, it was a different story. Witherspoon jabbed, moved, and made Holmes work like never before. 12 tough rounds. Close. Very close. When the decision was announced, Holmes held onto the belt by a thin, controversial split. That night, Witherspoon proved he belonged. Holmes proved he could survive anything. Then came Scott Frank, knocked down in 5. Then the drama hit. By 1985, Larry Holmes stood one win away from immortality. He wasn't just defending a title anymore. He was chasing a number, 49. That magic number. The same number of wins that Rocky Marciano carried to his grave, undefeated. If Holmes could beat Michael Spinks on September 21st, he'd tie it. One more, and he'd break it. That wasn't just history, it was legend. But Spinks wasn't there to be a footnote. Michael Spinks was the king of the light heavyweights. Fast, clever, awkward. He was stepping up a weight class, looking to shock the world. If he pulled it off, he'd be the first man ever to hold the light heavyweight crown and take the heavyweight throne while still reigning. A bold move, a dangerous one. But Spinks was chasing his own slice of history. Old-timers weighed in. Archie Moore, a man who'd worn the light heavyweight crown longer than anyone, laughed off Spinks' chances. "Larry will chew him up," he said. "Michael's quick, sure, but you can only go so fast." Well, sometimes speed isn't about legs, it's about timing. And Spinks had his right on the money. The bell rang, and what followed was a chess match dressed as a fight. Holmes had the strength. Spinks had the rhythm. 12 rounds passed like a blur of jabs, slips, and narrow escapes. When it was all said and done, the judges gave it to Spinks. Unanimous. The crowd was stunned. Holmes was furious. He stood in the spotlight, fire in his chest, and said something no one forgot. "Rocky Marciano couldn't carry my jockstrap." The rematch came on April 19th, 1986. Holmes wanted revenge. He wanted his history back. But the second fight was just as close, just as messy. 3 judges, 3 different views. 1 for Holmes, 2 for Spinks. Another loss for the former king. And with that, Holmes was done. On November 6th, 3 days after turning 37, he announced he was walking away. No parade, no fanfare, just a quiet exit from a sport he once ruled with an iron jab. But boxing doesn't let go easy, especially not when $2.8 million is on the table. January 22nd, 1988, Holmes steps back in, this time against a storm called Mike Tyson. Young, undefeated, a wrecking ball in gloves. Holmes tried, but Tyson was a whirlwind. 4th round, bang. Overhand, right drops Holmes. He gets up, then down again, and again. The referee waves it off. First time Holmes was ever knocked out. First time a mountain didn't just shake, it crumbled. He left the sport once more. But a few years passed, and the itch came back. In 1991, Holmes laced up again. This time, the spotlight had dimmed. He wasn't fighting in big arenas. He was fighting on weekday nights, the kind of card casual fans skipped. He fought often, sometimes every few weeks. Journeymen, young hopefuls, guys looking to build a name off his. But Holmes still had tricks. He still had hands. Then came February 7th, 1992. The night everyone thought the past would stay in the past. Ray Mercer, gold medalist from the '88 Olympics, young, strong, undefeated. He was supposed to run through Holmes. Instead, Holmes boxed circles around him. He jabbed, he turned, he made Mercer miss and miss again. 12 rounds later, upset complete. Holmes had done the impossible. Again, that one got him another shot at greatness. June 19th, 1992, Holmes versus Evander Holyfield. A chance to take back the heavyweight crown. Holmes gave all he had, but Holyfield was younger, sharper, just a step ahead all night. After 12 rounds, the judges had it clear. Holmes lost, but he walked out proud. 3 years later, in 1995, he went for it again. This time against Oliver McCall for the WBC title. Holmes came so close. 2 judges had him down by just a single point. One more round, one more punch, it might have been his. But once again, the decision didn't go his way. By 1996, Holmes was still fighting, still chasing, but his heart was getting tired. After knocking out Anthony Willis in June, he said something that sounded final. Unless I get a title shot, this is probably it. Well, boxing had one more card to deal him. January 24th, 1997. Holmes travels all the way to Copenhagen. One last chance. The IBO belt was on the line, and an undefeated Danish fighter named Brian Nielsen was the roadblock. They went 12 rounds. It was close, but the hometown favorite got the split decision. Holmes lost again. Then came a tease. A fight with George Foreman was signed for January 23rd, 1999. 2 legends, one final clash. But it fell apart weeks before. Foreman pulled out when the promoter didn't come through with the money. Holmes still kept his piece of the purse. Instead, Holmes ran it back with some old rivals. June 18th, 1999, he stopped Bone Crusher Smith in 8. November 17th, 2000, he stopped Mike Weaver in 6. And then, the final bell, July 27th, 2002, Norfolk, Virginia. Holmes climbed through the ropes one last time. Across from him was Eric Bunish, a crowd pleaser, big, tough. But Holmes was sharper, smarter, just better. 10 rounds later, Holmes had his hand raised. One last win. The curtain came down. No gold belts. No roaring stadiums. Just a man, nearly 53 years old, walking away from the only world he'd ever known. Not many could say they ruled the heavyweight division. Fewer still could say they did it their way. Larry Holmes could. After trading punches with the best of his time, Larry Holmes didn't fade away like so many others. No, he came home, but he didn't come back to relax or sit around telling old fight stories. He came back with a plan. He came back to build. The money he made from boxing, he didn't waste it. No flash, no crazy spending sprees. He invested, carefully, smartly. And before long, Larry Holmes wasn't just the former heavyweight champion of the world. He was Easton's most successful businessman. By the time he retired, Holmes had created over 200 jobs across town. Think about that. The same kid who once didn't have enough money for a sandwich was now signing paychecks and keeping families fed. By 2008, Holmes had his name on just about everything you could imagine. 2 restaurants, a nightclub, a gym where the next generation could train, a full office complex, even a snack bar and slot machines. Easton wasn't just where he lived. It was where he ruled, not with fists anymore, but with ideas. And he wasn't done. By 2009, Holmes had stepped into the world of media. He co-hosted a talk show with a title that made folks laugh and lean in. What the heck were they thinking? It was classic Larry. Sharp, honest, funny, and always a little unpredictable. In 2014, Holmes made a major business move. He sold off his large Easton complex to Gerald Gorman, a tech entrepreneur and CEO of Mail.com. It was a quiet, calculated deal, and just another example of how Holmes kept thinking ahead long after the cheers faded. But don't think Holmes disappeared. In 2016, he popped up in the animated series Mike Tyson Mysteries, playing himself in an episode called Unsolved Situations. He wasn't just being remembered, he was being celebrated. And now, as of March 21st, 2025, with the passing of George Foreman, Larry Holmes holds a unique title once again, the oldest living heavyweight boxing champion, a living link to one of boxing's greatest eras. In 2008, he was rightfully inducted into the International Boxing Hall of Fame, a place reserved for legends. But for Holmes, that was just one more plaque on the wall. His real legacy lives in the people he helped, the city he lifted, and the life he built after boxing. Holmes married Diane Robinson back in 1979. They had 2 children together. He also has 3 daughters from earlier relationships. Family always mattered to him, just like loyalty, just like Easton. Today, he lives just outside his hometown, in Palmer Township, Pennsylvania. Quiet, peaceful, still Larry Holmes, still the champ. And you know what? Fighting ran in the family. His younger brother, Mark Holmes, had his own run in the ring, trading leather in the middleweight division throughout the 80s. So the next time someone talks about fighters who lost it all after their careers, remind them of Larry Holmes, a man who built his fists into fortune, turned victories into vision, and came home not just to rest, but to reign. And there you have it, the story of Larry Holmes, a man who didn't just fight for glory inside the ring, but who fought every day after, building a legacy far beyond the ropes. From a young kid with a dream in Easton to a champion who lifted an entire community, Holmes showed us what it means to keep fighting, not just for titles, but for life itself. His story reminds us that true greatness isn't just about the battles won in the spotlight, but the battles won when the crowd goes quiet. And that, my friends, is a champion for the ages.